unless you've been actually living under a rock, there's been a lot of news stories coming out of Washington, D.C. over the past week.
Good afternoon, Rob. How are you?
Good afternoon. Well, as those of you who are watching can see, I am still under distress because the neon brain that normally sits behind me is not yet fixed. And it's not yet fixed because since the last time we recorded, I've done nothing to fix the brain.
You need a handyman.
Yeah, I mean, I can't do this.
Sure, you can.
Rob.
We've all seen you do it. We've seen you hang it a lot. You hung it, you broke it, hung it crooked.
Really, all this thing needs is tape along the back of it, and I apparently can't find the time to put a piece of like masking tape or some sort of tape on the backside of this thing just so it doesn't break in half. So I don't know. At some point, it may reappear or it may not. We'll see. We'll see what kind of energy I have about all of this. So
your wife must be so happy with all the work you do around the house.
Yeah. No, we have a lot of help, so that helps. I am not the most handy person. As a quick side story, the first house that Jen and I bought after we got married, it was a small brick house in South City of St. Louis, and they had put like a second story addition to the top of it. Because these houses have, they're triangle houses, but they put some dormers up on the attic, and we're going to make a living space up top. And I was excited because we got it for a good price, and because they had just put the outside up, but the inside was completely done. Like it was a couple that were breaking up, and so they wanted to sell the house. So I thought it would be really fun to finish an upstairs, like bedroom, bathroom, and then an extra area. After like the first 3 or 4 hours of engaging in what ended up being a multi-month process, I realized I don't like this.
Yeah.
And I think that's where my dreams of being an effective handyman ended.
I have a similar story. We bought our last house, and there was like a bench that was installed in the kitchen. A bench.
Okay.
And I don't like a bench because I want back support. Mm-hmm. So I go, we're getting rid of this bench. We're going to put a table and chairs in here. So I brought in a sledgehammer and just ripped the bench out, and then didn't realize that they had put the bench in before they stained the floor. So where I removed was all like, unvarnished wood, and I could never get the floor to match. And Allison was so pissed, and we eventually had to hire some guy to come in and match the stain. It's very embarrassing.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't have thought of that either.
Yeah.
And then, once it's done, it's done.
Yeah. There was no going back from that move. Yeah.
Switching gears and getting on the topic today, I think most of us, at least in the United States, but I'd wager in a lot of other places as well, unless you've been actually living under a rock, there's been a lot of news stories coming out of Washington, D.C. over the past week.
Rob, I don't know what you're talking about. There's something happening recently?
Let me help you. No, yeah. There's a couple things that have been happening out of there. One thing that had struck a chord with me was a lot of the aftermath of the conversation between Trump and Zelensky of Ukraine. So unlike shows before, you and I have done a little planning here, more so than normal. I think because we're trying to, we want to use this to talk about a different topic, which will end up being loyalty here. But we want to, tread lightly here. This is not a political podcast.
We enter this conversation with great trepidation.
Yes. I think when we've done this before, we said something similar. I feel like this is even more trepidation than when we talked about like the election.
Yeah.
But it seemed to be a very obviously topical thing. A lot of people are talking about this, and I think it does provide a good entree to talking about loyalties, different loyalties that people have, why people are loyal, Where does loyalty come from, and the psychology behind loyalty. So let me paint the picture of where I want to go, and I want to hear what you think too. But just to set the stage here, obviously last Friday, it feels like months ago already, but we are recording this on a Thursday. So 6 days ago, right? This happened last
I think
Friday.
so. I think that's right. Yeah.
Obviously, President Trump and Zelensky of Ukraine met. The meeting was about 45 minutes long, and the outcome of which ended up being Zelensky being asked to leave, Trump and Vice President being not very happy about the conversation itself, and a lot of nerves and anxiety and strong emotions from not only here in the United States, people who support Trump, people who don't, but really across the Western world.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah.
As you were talking about this, I was thinking, maybe would it be helpful if, how about this? Can I try to summarize the way I saw it play out?
Yes.
And while I do that, you say that didn't happen, or that's not how I viewed it, and you can give me a different perspective on what I want to do. Is I want to make sure that we have the sort of record straight. We're not going to talk about the implications or the reasons for, just what happened in that conversation.
Yep.
So my understanding is that they were to get together. It was essentially a signing ceremony. They were getting together to say, we're going to sign this agreement that there's going to be a ceasefire. And in exchange for this ceasefire, or as part of our involvement in Ukraine, we are going to have the ability to help you, Ukraine, mine some of your minerals. And Trump and Vance go in there thinking that that's what's going to happen. Zelensky goes there and goes, no, thank you. I want guarantees that you're going to support, that you're going to defend Ukraine if Russia continues to fight us.
Yeah.
And Trump
if
said,
after a peace deal is brokered, they don't just go back on it and invade them again.
Mm-hmm. So Trump is like rolling this out, and he's very nice and I would say favorable towards Zelensky. And it seems like things are good for like 35 minutes. And at a certain point, Zelensky goes, I'm not signing it unless I get a guarantee.
Mm-hmm.
And then Trump sort of gets his back up a little bit, is pushing back a little bit. And then eventually JD Vance jumps in and almost in defense of Trump says, wait a second, we've put all this money and time into supporting you. Why are you not grateful enough?
Mm-hmm.
You need to make this deal. You're in a bad position.
Yep.
To which Zelensky gets pissed and says, JD, have you been to Ukraine? And the answer is no. And then JD goes, well, I've read reports about Ukraine. You got a problem. And then Zelensky then says to Trump and JD, you guys are fine now, but there's a big ocean protecting you, but there won't be forever. To which Trump then gets his back up and attacks and says, don't tell us how you're going to feel. You're in a bad position. You need to make the deal. And the conflict sort of escalates, I would argue, sort of out of control. And they end up closing the conference. Is that a fair, anything I missed there?
I don't think so. I think factually that is my understanding as well. I think my understanding of the conversation about the mineral rights was, we'll help you / we want to make sure that the United States is compensated to some extent for the money we provided you militarily over the past 3 years as well, which is why why Trump is interested in kind of securing these mineral rights.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I think the way you put it, I heard is more, we want to, we want to help you do it. Well, it's to help you do it so that the United States gets something in return for all the money and resources that we've spent.
Yep.
So I think what was probably supposed to be a bit more benign and boring of a conference turned out to be anything but. And just reading all those stories since then, like it's It's gotten, Europeans talking more in unison together. It's gotten, certainly Russians and the leadership there, the political leadership there, talking differently. And as you might imagine, there is a lot of conversation inside the United States about what happened. And is usually the case with politics, particularly politics that include Trump. Everyone is taken aside. So there are the folks on the left who found this to be just an existential crisis of leadership. It caused them to think that this is their worst fear of what Trump would do, which is blow up decades old relationships and allies in favor of getting what he wants and kind of moving more towards Russia. And on the right, it appears as if this was a calculated effort by Trump to get what he wanted. He didn't get it, so he didn't sign something. It appeared that Zelensky was very disrespectful of Trump and the United States writ large. I even saw some commentary that, it was disrespectful what Zelensky wore to the meeting. And so people are even diving down into something like that. Like, well, he was obviously not ready to listen because of what he was wearing, which is kind of like fancy combat fatigues. But that's become his, I don't think I've ever seen him not wear something like that.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah. I mean, it's amazing how strong the opinions are about his dress.
Yes.
Like that is to me, it's a wild, and when I question people about it, they're like, yeah, well, he's, whatever he's been, pictures were taken of him for Vanity Fair. He has the ability to get a suit. And I guess the question is, I'm sure he could get a suit, but I just don't know that I care. But there's very strong opinions about what this means for what it represents as far as how he approaches the United States.
Yeah. And so listening to all of this, observing it, one of the things that caused me to wonder is, my God, the strength of loyalty that Trump has among the people who support him. I mean, I think most presidents, especially in the modern era, have a strong sense of support and loyalty. But I started paying attention to politics. I'm almost 40 years old. So in the 90s, I was aware of it, but it was more in the 2000s with George W. Bush. And from there on out that I paid more attention to it. I don't know. I mean, the support that Trump gets from his supporters and the detractors that he has, the significant severe reactions that they have to what he does on both sides is intense to me. Is that your experience too?
Yeah, I always think about I think it's exhausting on either side. And I can imagine it's exhausting to have to, like I was thinking about when I watched this, I'll be sort of transparent. When I watched this, I could not believe and I'm not that involved politically. I don't know the big picture well enough. So I'm not saying that I'm right about it, but my reaction seeing it was, oh, this is embarrassing. That's how I felt. And then, and my immediate thought was, well, there are people that are going to have to create a reason why this isn't, that this wasn't bad behavior on Trump's side. And I was thinking that's got to be, there's just no way you could do, good luck. Right. And then I learn more about it and I read, and there's very robust reasons why people on Trump's side think he did a good job.
Yeah.
And then I'm watching a clip of during the State of the Union or Trump speaking to Congress, and they've got a kid that survived cancer, and he goes and meets Trump. And then I see in my mind, it's a wonderful, nice thing that was done. That's it. And then but then the liberal media is, look at Trump taking advantage of this poor kid that had cancer. And I just was thinking about, like, it feels exhausting to have to see something, and no matter what it is, we've got to come up with a reason why it fits our
Sure.
narrative. Like in
Yep.
such an extreme way, where in both cases I'm like, we can acknowledge when things are good and when things are not. I have a hard time believing that we're really that far apart as far as how we see events on the political stage.
You describe yourself as someone who's not like as politically involved. I would describe myself as more politically involved, and I have fairly strong political opinions. So I saw the same interaction, and I had what most would consider a strong reaction to that situation as well.
I view you as someone who sees that, who watches it, and then you don't want to have a reaction. So I just see like a little, just a drip of blood come out of your nose. I'm fine. Doesn't bother me at all.
After that initial reaction, that's when this question started to emerge for me as well. Why? Yeah, why are people falling back to their camps? And you know, I think we're being a little silly not to suggest that we don't know the reason why. I mean, we've talked on this show before. There's a lot of different cognitive biases that cause people to do this, right? They've made the choice either for or against them, so they're looking for information to support, you know, what they've done already. There's a sunk cost, like I put all my eggs into this basket or not, and so I have to. It feels uncomfortable for me to go back on that. So there's a lot of reasons for it, but the sense of loyalty that Trump gets, there isn't much that he and a lot of other very popular either politicians or other folks can do oftentimes to cause their supporters to easily and maybe more objectively evaluate what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it just made me wonder why. And I think I'd like to talk about loyalty as one reason why this happens.
Okay.
So I guess before talking about it, just loyalty is probably one of those words that most of us use. We have a pretty common understanding, but to just define it, I would define loyalty as having a strong commitment or allegiance to a person, group, or idea, often tied to emotions and identity. So I'm reading this from a definition I found. But specifically, I like the last couple words there. It's tied to an emotion or an identity. Because I think when we're talking about this example, especially in politics overall, I mean, there isn't much more emotional. I've said on here before, you know, I think political decisions are more emotional than they are objective for people.
Mm-hmm.
Would you agree with that?
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
I hear people a lot of times say, well, you're voting against your interests. And I'm like, well, that's such a, and I've even said that before, but I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
that's such a incomplete way of looking why people vote, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is a very emotional thing.
Mm-hmm.
Or otherwise you would, you know, I know this happens less now, but people would never change the party they voted for, right? I mean, the type of issues that were important to them would never change, and we know that that's not true. So I think it's that sense of emotion and identity that gets at people.
Mm-hmm.
So Dave, would you say that being a loyal person, we don't have to talk about a specific scenario now, but being loyal, is that a good or a bad thing?
I think it's a very good. The answer is I think it's a good thing. I would view it as a positive characteristic.
Okay. Why?
Because interpersonally, I think it's adaptive. You know, like I think one-on-one, when you're building relationships with people, if you're not loyal, I think you can't build a close connection. I think it's part of what no one will trust you. You can't be part of community if you're not loyal to the community.
Right. And I think a lot of folks who study loyalty, I know I looked into some anthropologists who write about loyalty and say, at least for humans, it is very much of an innate characteristic that most of us are loyal in part because we are reinforced positively to be loyal to the group that we find ourselves in.
Yeah.
I would also agree with you that in general, loyalty is viewed as a positive characteristic. I think of what's the opposite of loyalty is what? Selfishness, being disloyal, either not loyal to the people you're supposed to be loyal to, or selfish, just kind of concerned about what you need and what you want over what others need and others want.
Yeah. Every man for himself.
Yeah. Yeah. So a lot of upside there, and I think that's how most people would view it. But what about the downsides? What do you see as the downside of
I think
loyalty?
Well, I think the downside, I mean, this is a good example, is if the goal is to be part of a clan like it was thousands of years ago, I think it's very adaptive.
Yeah.
Or if the goal is to be part of a family now, I think it's really adaptive. If the
Mm-hmm.
goal is to make decisions about your political allegiance, I think it's really stupid.
Yep.
It does not serve. It is not. Engineers should not be loyal to anything when they're figuring out if a bridge is going to hold a bunch of cars.
Right.
Right. The question should be, what does the data say? What is the implication of X, Y, and Z number? Do you know what I'm saying? And I think we end up, I don't know why there's reason for anybody to be loyal to Trump or to Harris. It should have,
Yeah. Or
you
to
should,
Republicans or
doesn't
Democrats.
matter.
Yeah.
Right. But we view it like we're part of that family. And so
Yeah.
we'll be very, to spite ourselves, we will align with whatever the sort of the political talking points are.
I agree. I think, and I think political parties, which at least in the United States is how we experience our politics, which is different. At least it's at least somewhat different than a lot of other countries experience. There's political parties, but in many other countries there are more,
Mhm.
and the different systems, and so it's different. But I think particularly in the United States, because that's the way we experience our politics, political parties know this, and so they try to artificially create a sense of loyalty, right? That
Oh, say more about that. What do you mean? How do they do that?
well, I think it's almost like an organization. In other words, you if voting is the product and we are the consumers, they want us, the consumers, to buy their product, which is vote for the R or for the D, for the Republican or for the Democrat.
Yeah.
And I would argue that they care less about policy issues, about some of the specific things that most people care about objectively, and play more to people's emotions, in part because they know that that gets people riled up,
Mhm.
activated, and then
Mhm.
more likely to take action.
Mhm.
And I think the downside of that, particularly in a social media age, I don't think that's new, but I think now because this one story that we're talking about has taken on how many different shades, not only
Yeah.
in our domestic media, but certainly internationally. And this is just one story.
Mhm.
Multiply this by thousands, tens of thousands of stories, and you get a political landscape where people are in these echo chambers and they are emotionally activated all the time. And that just helps political parties keep their customers.
Yeah. Why do you think we continue to seek activation? Like, why do more people just go, I'd rather not be activated by this, and so I'm going to unplug?
I think
Why do
most
we?
people, yeah, I think people will say that, but then they don't do it.
Yeah, we like it
Right.
for some
It's
reason,
like a
right?
dopamine hit. Like, I wonder, right? You get that way. And we've done an episode on self righteousness, but I think that could be part of it. Like, all right, see, look, I'm right.
Yeah.
And it makes us feel good because we're right, because we knew it all along.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
think that's part of it. I think it helps that we can feel like we're part of something, right? We're part of this group that knows everything and the other side doesn't. And
Mhm.
now it's our job. It's a call to action to do something.
Mhm.
I think that's another thing that political parties play off of is, get activated and then go do something, go vote.
Mhm. Mhm.
I don't know. Those are the two answers that come to mind for me. What about you? What do you think?
Well, I don't know, but but I was thinking about, me messing around on my phone, you know, and then coming out of the bathroom in a rage because of something that I've read on Facebook.
Yeah.
And I'm like, does that give me I mean, it must at some level. I guess I have direction. I feel very, very righteous in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I know what I'm really linear about how the world should be. I mean, I guess all of that is soothing at some level, right? There's no ambiguity when I
Right.
watch something that makes me think someone's a lunatic on my
Right.
phone.
Yeah.
Versus if I got news that was more bland, and I guess I would feel less, it would create more ambiguity, which is an interesting
Yeah.
thing. So if I think about this interaction with Trump, Vance, and Zelensky, if I look at it and go, this is the most embarrassing thing I've ever seen. What kind of horrific leadership do we have? I feel really good if I take that stance. Or if I go, Zelensky's a massive asshole. How dare him talk to our president that way after all that we've done for him? Again, I feel very in the pocket. I know exactly what
Right.
is happening. And by the way, I can probably I read it better than everybody else, right? That's
Yeah.
is like the people on either side, you don't understand. If you understood everything, you would know why our guy is right, you know? But if I
Right.
go and I go, hey, like imagine how many people saw that and then go, hey, what do the foreign policy experts think are the implications of this? Like no one, that's not anybody's first step. They run to their respective corners and look for the influencers in that space to tell them how to interpret it.
Right.
You know?
Right. And then tying it back to loyalty, right? And then they, regardless of your stance, you go back to your corners, and because you have you've decided that this is your person or not, out of sense of loyalty, at least in part, you come to their defense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because you are loyal to this person or this cause. And so that's why you're going to see the talking heads on either side saying why this was the dumbest or the smartest thing that a president has ever done.
Yeah.
And then all the chatter everywhere else supporting or not supporting that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I think the issue becomes, to your point, like so many other cognitive shortcuts, there is no place for nuance in this, and it completely circumvents that front part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex. That's the more logical side, and it goes straight to that lizard part of our brain.
Yeah. Yeah.
That controls our emotions, and that's how we're making these types of decisions.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the scary part for me, is blind loyalty without any sort of, again, reflection, judgment on why we think or why we're feeling this way, and what we, is this appropriate or not for the situation. That's the downside to me.
Mm-hmm. Let me play devil's advocate. I just thought of something let me see what you think about this. When I buy a car, what I do is I go on to US News and World Report and I say, I'm going to buy an SUV. I want to buy a small SUV. What's the top 3 small SUVs? And then I go look at it and I go, which one's the coolest looking at those 3? And then that's how I buy my vehicle. Because I know that US News and World Report knows more about cars and has done more research than I could ever do. It would be maladaptive for me to try and roll under the hood or under the engine of all these small SUVs and try to figure out what car is best. So I should find a source that I trust, and I really should listen to that source and do whatever that source says to do. That really would be more adaptive than me trying to figure it out myself.
100%.
So maybe it is adaptive I see this conflict between Zelensky and Trump, and I just go, hey, I really think this person knows what they're talking about. Let's go see what this person thinks. And then just align with that person versus me trying to figure it out myself.
Which I think is why political parties exist. It's a shortcut.
Yeah.
I generally know what Republicans, or I generally know with the Democrats, at least in the United States, what they think and what their values are. And I generally align to this party or that party. So I don't disagree with you. But in your example, you're going to US News and World Report, and you're probably, in addition to looking at how, cool a car looks, they also have a lot of data and information. Because when I look at that, I would say, well, I don't even know, like, what are some of the criteria that I should look at? And they're going to list that out for me. And so I'm looking to them as a resource to help me make a decision. They're not making my decision.
Yeah.
And that's the difference that I see is political parties and loyalty to a political party. They make the decision. I decide I'm either an R or a D. Whereas
Yeah.
if you use that example, this informs my decision. It gives me information to then move forward with something in a way that when you get your emotion involved is a lot less likely to happen.
Yeah. And US News and World Report isn't funded by, Toyota.
Right. Yeah.
They don't have us. They're not like, oh, this is the Toyota
Yeah.
source, right? It's just hopefully unbiased data about the vehicles.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So they have less skin in the game there.
Yeah. So really, maybe the takeaway is we should not only should we be auditing like what we think about the what's happening on the political stage, but we should be evaluating our sources. Like, how do we know that whoever Chris Cuomo is really a guy that should be listened to?
Right. But in politics, like nobody cares. If they cared, then there would be so few sources because they would be well resourced, well researched, and people would be making decisions based on that objective information. And again, when it comes to decisions like this, that's not what people are actually looking for.
Mm-hmm.
At least a lot of people. I don't know what percentage it is, but a lot of people. Let's switch situations here. So I still want to talk about loyalty, but I want to now focus on a different environment. Let's say loyalty at work. So you and I work with a lot of employees, teams, leaders, and organizations. Would you say that loyalty at work is viewed as a positive attribute of a professional, of a leader as well?
Yes. Yes. I think it's a very important thing at work. Yes.
I would say I hear it that it is. So when I'm talking to leaders, I will oftentimes ask them what some of their top strengths are, what they do best, what are they known for, what's their brand.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say 20 to 25% of the time, included in that response, is some mention of loyalty. I'm a loyal person.
Yeah.
And I would agree that could have some upside. But I think that's some downside too.
Well, can you define what do you mean by loyal at work? How are you describe a loyal behavior versus not a loyal behavior at work?
My assumption when people say that is, I'm here for the long run. I don't give up easily or quickly, and I want to be at this organization for a long time. I'm not going anywhere.
Got it. Loyal to the business.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I could see if you're applying for a job, that's certainly something you'd want to say.
Mm-hmm.
Like, hey, I'm not going to be here for a year and then go elsewhere. And I think a lot of hiring managers, when they look at resumes, if they see people that are jumping around every 12 to 18 months, like, this person's not very loyal, they're not going to stick around.
Mm-hmm.
I may not want to hire them, or I may not want to invest into them as
Mm-hmm.
much if I think they're not going to stay.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a lot of upside to loyalty, but I argue there's a lot of downside to it as well. I've looked into this a little bit more, but I'd be curious to hear your initial reactions to the downsides of being a loyal employee or loyal leader within an organizational setting.
Well, I think it depends if you're talking about loyalty as it relates to like to the organization, versus to the people.
I think it's an individual being loyal to an organization.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the downside is that the risk is that you are not someone that pushes you're less. The assumption is you're less ambitious. You're less likely to advocate for yourself. You're okay with your career stagnating long term. Like the chances of you getting into a job and it being the perfect job for you and you constantly being challenged over the course of your whole career is pretty slim.
Yep.
And so it a little bit suggests that you don't have the energy to go look for what's best.
Yep. There's actually some research that would suggest the same thing, that people who are very loyal are evaluated more positively, but are promoted less.
Yeah.
People who are viewed as more loyal could potentially be paid less, especially if you make the connection that job hopping can at times allow you to make more money than if you are an employee with the same organization for 10 or 15 years.
Yeah.
So I think people who are loyal are liked more, which is certainly a positive outcome for us to have, but don't necessarily achieve some of those career goals, monetarily, role, promotion, title wise. There's some data to suggest that can be the case depending upon the organization. Because I would say that when I think of people who are maybe too loyal, whatever that means is they may be unwilling to rock the boat. They may be unwilling to do something that would cause them to be viewed negatively, potentially lose their job. And so they're more of that good soldier.
Yeah.
I've interacted with people that way, at least.
Yeah, absolutely. I think loyalty in a business environment is very interesting because I think your job is to have people believe that you are loyal.
Yeah.
And your job is also to do, whether or not we're talking about interpersonally or for the organization.
Yeah.
And your job is also to progress and to make an impact and to do whatever is best for your company and what is best for you. You know what I mean? So for example, if you look at like someone who is a charge nurse, that charge nurse is going to be interpersonally very loyal to the other charge nurses. I care only about the nurses. We're all in this together, right? Arms are linked. But then if I promote that charge nurse and they become, the chief nursing officer in a hospital, their loyalty has to shift from the nurses to the executive team. And that's there's a lot of tension that comes with that. You want the nurses to feel like you care about them, but you also need to recognize that the people you are most aligned with are this new group. And so it's like, how do you progress in your career and be able to shift your loyalty to the right, to the right spaces?
Yeah, I think that could be the downside of someone who's been promoted a lot within the same organization is sometimes that can affect their relationships. I know I've heard that from a lot of leaders who started, at an entry level role and now are higher level leaders within an organization. Is their relationships are different, and people who are considering those moves oftentimes will point to, well, what's going to happen to my relationships now because I'm friends with a lot of these people? What's going to happen if I make this move? Because then I imagine my relationship with them will change.
Yep.
So it's different. Yeah. So as opposed to are you loyal or not, it's to where is your loyalty? Yeah. That's a good point.
Yeah.
I also think that people who are very loyal may be at risk for being taken advantage of. I think that's true inside of organizations. And I think it's also true in the third area to talk about. We talk about politics, organizations, and we talk about just romantic relationships. And so I think within a romantic relationship, like a marriage, like, I got married in a Catholic church, and, there's those lines you have to say, sickness and health till death do you part. Like there's a strong,
that's pretty loyal.
Yeah. There's a strong expectation of loyalty.
In
those situations. And I think, hopefully my wife would agree that, so far so good there. Obviously there can be situations or times when that sense of loyalty to a spouse, to a partner, is not going to serve the person well. I think an example that comes to mind for me is the episode we did last week, right? So in situations where you are in abusive relationships, whether it's verbal, emotional, or physical abuse, but you stick with it.
Right.
Why do you stick with it? Well, there's that sunk cost. I mean, I've spent, 15 years, 30 years with this person. So you have this sense of loyalty, but my God, what aren't you thinking about there?
Yeah. You know what it reminds me of is I was listening to Armchair Expert, and Dax Shepard was talking about one of his daughters had this nightmare that Dax and Kristen Bell got divorced. And Dax was like, we would never get divorced. Why would we get divorced? And the daughter goes, I had a dream that mom cheated on you. And Dax said, sweetheart, even if mom cheats on me, I would not get divorced. And I heard that and I was thinking, first of all, I don't know what I would do, but I would never utter that I wouldn't get divorced because I don't want her thinking she can get away with it. Do you know what I'm saying? But I was thinking about that. Like, to me, there is loyalty is really, but I admire Dax that he's able to sort of say that and acknowledge no matter what, I'm going to stay with her.
Right.
But there is a line where staying with that person is really bad for you, arguably bad for your kids. Right. And it's like finding what that line is. I think that's sort of what you're talking about here, as far as, loyalty is not, blind loyalty is not a good thing.
Yep. And I think that's it, is the concept of blind loyalty is a good way to look at some of what we're talking about. The overused side of loyalty is being blindly loyal to a person, to an organization, or to a political party, or any other thing that you might identify with, because it can prevent you from logically thinking through, well, how is this good for me as well? It may not always be, a huge upside, but is there any upside? Now, that said, I do think that people are questioning their loyalties a lot more than they used to. And I say that in part because of all of the news stories I've seen about, trust in institutions. I think this was a Gallup poll that I saw that just showed all these different institutions. There's religious organizations, political organizations, societal organizations, and trust in almost every institution over the past 25, 30 years has gone down.
Interesting. Why?
And so in the United States, in general, they didn't say why, but I think that that's something, as we kind of close our conversation here today, that I'd like to think through with you. Why do you think that is? Why do you think I have a guess?
I mean, I think that they've proven themselves untrustworthy.
Yeah, certainly part of it.
I mean, I think every large institution, at least the ones that you've named, I think have proven themselves untrustworthy. I guess that's my personal bias.
Yeah.
I think religion certainly has.
Mm-hmm.
Politics, dear God, have they? I think the medical community has. I think academics have. I think every realm, I think everybody has. I would be in the conspiracy theorist camp on this, but that's my thought.
Well, I know that's where you like to live, but this would
Join me now.
actually be no. I mean, I will never do that. Anywhere you are is where I'm not. I would say I agree with you in part, because other ones I didn't mention, like marriage as an institution. I saw this interesting stat that, and who knows how valid this is, but over time in a married couple, the frequency of men saying that they cheat on their spouses has not changed much over time. The stat that I found was that infidelity occurs in about 25% of marriages, and that the frequency of men reporting being unfaithful to their spouses has been about the same. But what they found more recently is that since the 1990s, women are increasingly more likely to cheat on their spouses.
Yeah.
So men kind of always been more likely to do so than women. And that over the past 25, 30 years, the share of women who are doing that is increasing, which would again indicate that the state of marriage, even as an institution, is not as strong.
And it could just be that women are now more comfortable saying that they'll have an affair.
Right. That's certainly part of it.
But I agree either way. I think there's reason to believe that the institution of marriage isn't, on as solid footing as people would like it to.
Right. Be. I think the reason behind this, one of the reasons behind this, is just the amount of information that exists. It is almost impossible, if you care about something, to not know a shit ton more about it than you could pre-internet age. So I was raised Catholic, and if I had questions about the Catholic Church, if this was in the 60s or 70s, I probably just wouldn't.
Right.
And if I wanted to be critical about it and I wanted some objective source, I don't know where I would find that. It wouldn't be in a newspaper. It wouldn't be on the, 5 o'clock local news. It wouldn't be in the national news. Like, that type of stuff wouldn't emerge. Now, all over the place. Those
That's so
types of
fun.
stories
Yeah.
get out a lot more.
Yeah.
And that's just one small example of anything. And I think the more people know about some of these historic institutions, the more questions people have about them, the more critical people are about them, which just causes trust overall about that institution to decline.
It's interesting. I was thinking about that. Like, I come from a Catholic family also. In my formative years of my faith, all of my questions were answered by my grandmother,
Yeah.
who could explain everything by the fact that she had seen Jesus's face in a candle. You
Yeah.
know, and as a third grader, you're like, oh, solid.
Shit.
Yeah.
Right.
No more questions. You know, but now you're bombarded with other people's perspectives.
Yeah. And especially when you get, you know, people in their teenage years who are a bit more primed to be critical, and then they have this vast amount of information at their fingertips. You know, I would imagine that it's fairly common for people even 100 years ago, 15 to 25, to be a bit critical of religion, to use as an example. But then at the end, you come back to it because other than just being uncomfortable or not wanting the structure in your life, you come back to it because of the sense of community that it provides. Family does it, right? There's a lot pulling you more back in.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's a lot less pulling you back into that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think that there's a lot of evidence to suggest that although loyalty exists in some ways, it does not exist in the ways that it used to.
Yeah.
Which to me begs the question, where, and I don't have any answer to this, where do you think it exists more than it used to? Do you have a sense of where people are more loyal now than maybe they would have been 20, 30 years ago?
Well, I was thinking when you're sort of talking about that, I was thinking, well, it's changed because it's less adaptive for it to be for us
Sure.
to operate the way we used to operate. So I think what is more adaptive now is for people to be loyal to themselves. Meaning more
Mm,
people are now more interested in and invested in what gives me a sense of purpose, who are the people that I want to be around, what's the life I want to live. You know, have you seen those things when they would talk about kind of what drove people to work? You know, like when you had a job in the 50s, what you wanted
yeah.
was a job that was stable and would never change.
Hmm.
And then when you got a job in the 70s, what you wanted was a job that you liked.
Yep.
And then in 90s, it was like a job that gave you whatever, a purpose. And then a job in the 2000s, it's like you want a job that's flexible and will give you freedom and give you purpose, right? We now
Yeah.
are able to sort of really tailor down what we're wanting.
Yep. There is a book, and I didn't read the whole thing, so I may get the name wrong. It's something like, maybe it's Bowling Alone. I think it was written by a sociologist, and essentially the theme behind it was, yeah, I mean, back in the 50s and 60s, they belonged to a lot of different institutions or organizations. So the title, I think, was rated like a bowling league.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
people bowled together, they did things together.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, and this is certainly true in my experience, there's a lot less of that. Those kind of societal civic institutions that bring people together don't exist,
Mm-mm.
at least as far as I see it, as much as they used to.
Mm-hmm.
But that could be, to your point, a rise in just a focus on me, what
Yeah.
I want and what I need.
Yeah. I wonder if that's true that those things, I know that maybe the formal bowling league is different, but
It is
there are
called Bowling
things that,
Alone, by the way.
what'd you say?
It is called Bowling Alone.
Bowling alone. But maybe you and I, because of our sort of stages in life, maybe we're exposed to less of it. Because there are things that I've never even thought about. Like I was watching the Gabby Petito documentary, and she was finding friends on Bumble. And I know that if you want to play soccer, I got an app that I can go to St. Louis, and it's called like the Player app, and I can find pickup games for soccer in St. Louis around me at any moment.
So it does make me think of something you and I have talked about before, where, people maybe do have those types of connections, but they're very niche, right? It's my own small preference here. But
Mm-hmm.
what I wonder about then is does that prevent people from interacting with people who have different values,
Oh yeah.
experiences, preferences than they do?
Mm-hmm.
And that just reinforces this bubble that we can
Yeah.
oftentimes live in.
Yeah. We now have the luxury of finding our doppelgangers across the world.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So if you join a bowling league, I'm going to have to be in that bowling league with both conservatives and Democrats.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to be exposed to different things versus now I'd like to be in the Democrat, gay men
Mm-hmm.
that are between the ages of 35 and 25,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
with black hair.
Uh-huh.
I could get so narrow that
Yeah.
everybody's just like me.
And you can find most of that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's probably the downside. All right. Last question. Are you a loyal person?
I think I am a loyal person.
Why?
I'm trying to think. I think you asked me that before, and I'm trying to remember what did I say? Did I say I was loyal or not loyal? I think I am. I think I am loyal to a very tight knit group of people.
Okay.
I think that I am slow to loyalty. Like I think to my family, my close friends, I think I'm very loyal, but I struggle with I think I default to a more selfish orientation.
Mm.
What do you think? Are you?
I think I am, but I can be. I may. It doesn't take me too long to be loyal. I think in part for me that's because of my desire to like connect. I've said on the show before, right? I as a pretty big extrovert, I like a large network of people. I guess it doesn't mean that I'm loyal to them, but I enjoy connecting with people. So I can be a bit Pollyannish at times and a bit quick to build a relationship. But I found that as I've gotten older, I'm a bit more critical than I used to be. So I was really quick to do that earlier on in life. And now I'm still pretty quick to do it, probably compared to the average person, but find myself nitpicking a lot more than I used to be and saying, I'm not sure if this person or this group is worth my time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I think it's more just to do with I have less time available to dedicate to these types of things. And so I'd like to think that that's why it is. I also just sometimes enjoy being critical. So
Yeah. I think that's I think I relate to that. I think that and maybe it's part of just my education. I think that when I was in school,
yeah,
I was like being accommodating and comfortable with
yeah,
and flexible for everybody was really important to me.
mm-hmm.
And then I think I've become stodgier and more opinionated and meaner as I've gotten, I maybe less away from people yelling at me for not being
yeah,
open-minded, but I'm
yeah,
like more closed-minded than
yeah,
probably I was before.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I can definitely see that in you.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah.
close-minded. All right, Dave. Well, thanks for the conversation.
Yes.
Now, we've talked a lot about the downsides of blind loyalty. However, there are upsides to blind loyalty. And one of those, a way that you could demonstrate, listeners, your blind loyalty to us is to, especially if you've enjoyed our conversation, like, subscribe so you can listen to more of Dave and I discuss these types of topics.
Mm-hmm. Do it.
Yeah, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us on social media at Shrink Space. And if you have ideas for us about shows in the future, if we've missed anything about how you view loyalty, the upsides and the downsides of it, of course, feel free to comment or email us at shrinkspaceshow@gmail.com.